But a very warm welcome to this, the third in our series of In Conversation with colleagues from different sectors in the business community. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Craig and I will be your host for today's session. And I'm delighted to be joined by a terrific panel of three young millennials with which to explore our 3 R's of resilience, reskilling and relationships as we aim to support one another to prepare for the new post-COVID norm. Before I introduce the panel, just a few items of housekeeping. Firstly, this evening's session will be recorded with edited highlights being shown on social media and YouTube over the coming weeks. Secondly, if you have yet to do so, please do switch off your microphones so that our speakers can be heard clearly and without distraction. And third, be very grateful if you could participate in tonight's discussion, and you can do that by using the chat function on Zoom. And my Business Matters colleague, Eric Smith, who many of you will know, will be keeping a close eye on the contributions from the audience. And I'll be inviting Eric to share some of your thoughts and questions after we've heard from each of our panel members. So without further ado, let me introduce our fantastic panel. Firstly, Kirsty Shaw. Kirsty is a solicitor with Brodie's, specialising in dispute resolution within the construction, engineering and energy sectors. Ryan Bissoonauth is a project manager with Wind2 Limited, a specialist onshore wind energy developer. And Robbie Craig, a user interface designer with IG Group, a global leader in online trading and investments. So Kirsty, Ryan and Robbie, you're all very welcome. And in a slight departure from previous interviews, I'm going to ask each of our panel to speak for about 5 minutes or so on one of our 3 R's of resilience, reskilling and relationships. And they'll be sharing with us their own experiences and insights as a younger person making their way in the world of work. As mentioned earlier, we'll then open the discussion up by seeking to address any comments or questions that you may wish to raise through the chat function. So Kirsty, perhaps I can turn to you first, if I may. Just thinking about resilience, very important topic, particularly given all that they've been through. What does resilience mean from your perspective, and how do you ensure that you remain resilient during periods of stress or change?
Well, thank you, Michael, for that introduction, first of all, and thank you for having me along today. From my perspective, resilience is actually something that I find quite interesting to have been asked about. It's not something that's come naturally to me throughout my life, and certainly it's something that I have had to practice through the majority of my adulthood. But I suppose in one perspective, that makes me quite a good person to speak to about resilience, because it's something I have practiced for years. And certainly when the pandemic hit, it wasn't as drastic a change for me as it might have been for some, because I had already developed some coping mechanisms when I'm in stressful or difficult circumstances. Coming back to your question about what resilience means for me, I think the best way that I can describe it is that it's either finding yourself or sometimes putting yourself in difficult situations, situations that are out with your comfort zone, and recognizing that you could just turn away from it and run away, essentially, but consciously deciding that you are going to push yourself through the difficult situation and come out the end of it. That's resilience from my point of view.
And you mentioned coping mechanisms there, Kirsty. So can you give us a sense of what sort of strategies you adopt to help to retain your sort of personal resilience during difficult times?
Yeah, a few of them are, I suppose you could probably describe some of them as quite general coping mechanisms that a lot of people already possess. But for me, it's things that I've actually worked really hard to maintain over the last few years. And things such as maintaining exercise on a daily basis really helps clear my head. For instance, just coming along to today's presentation, in order to get out of my head and think about ways to keep my stress levels down, I would go for a run or do some form of exercise in order to get myself out of that stressful situation and calm myself down. The other thing that a lot of people, I think, are sometimes a bit critical of are things like mindfulness and meditation and yoga. And these are all things that I do frequently in order to try to cope during stressful circumstances.
And what about, obviously, I mentioned earlier that you're a solicitor, you appear in the court at times. There must be periods in which you're very highly stressed at that particular moment, and it'd be difficult to obviously go for a run round the court or whatever. Are there any particular techniques or tips that you adopt in those situations?
I think the main thing for me is, if you are stressed, evidently you have to make sure that you're prepared for whatever it is you're coming up against. So before I'm going into court, I like to make sure I'm very prepared, but that doesn't mean that anxiety won't occasionally kick in just before you go into the courtroom. But I suppose there's very little that you can do when you are in that situation, other than try to find within yourself that self-belief in order to get through it, what it is that you are being asked to do. And there's nothing in particular that I think can really help in those situations, but it is really about preparation and making sure that you feel as comfortable as you can before putting yourself in that situation.
Yeah. And we've heard a lot over the last 12 months, Kirsty, about mental well-being and the impact the pandemic has had on the overall kind of well-being of the nation and our kind of overall sense of resilience. I mean, what's your observation been as you've sort of reflected back over the past 12 months, and what lessons might you take forward going, as we look ahead?
Well, the pandemic came as a shock to everybody, and we've all had to adapt to the changes that have come with the pandemic. I think the main thing that we all have to understand is that we can't prepare for every single situation that's going to present itself. And all we can really do is the best with the circumstances we have. So a lot of people have found themselves in very difficult economical, personal circumstances over the last 12 months. And it's nothing that we could have done to prevent those. There's nothing we could have done to prevent those circumstances. So going forward, I think it's important that everybody appreciates that some things are out with our control, and the best thing you can do is come up with the coping mechanisms that work for you in order to get yourself through that period of stress and anxiety.
Yeah, super. Well, I think, as I said earlier, if people do have questions, then feel free to ask those through the chat function. We'll come back to you, Kirsty, in a few minutes with me, but for the moment, thank you very much. That's been really insightful. Ryan, could I turn to you now? I mean, even as a young man, you've experienced a few changes already in your working life. Yep. What, from your point of view, have you taken from those experiences, and in particular, how do you approach the transition from one role to another?
Yeah, I mean, a caveat, my experience being that I didn't have a clear job role or industry specifically in mind when I graduated, which I suppose has made it, I've not had tied myself to one ambition or one goal. So I don't want to insinuate that my experience is applicable to those that have a clear passion. I wouldn't want to go down the poorly thought out government poster and the ballerina that's now going to be in cybersecurity. But for me, I suppose my shift in industry was I went into a very small renewable energy development company, and then ultimately ended up transitioning into a really large multinational financial software provider. And I have since, actually, just when the pandemic kicked in, I had made the transition back to renewables. But the experience itself, was daunting. It wasn't the most enjoyable, sort of, particularly when you make that conscious decision that I need to change, I need to move. And there's the doubts, even in my mind, without having a really fixed goal of this is where I want to end up in my career, you're already thinking, there's that voice in your head that's saying, am I losing the skills that I've accumulated over the past, couple of years? When I move, will I be leaving that behind? Will I be starting from scratch? Because I think there's this sort of connotation of reskilling, that it's sort of, right, scrap what you've learned to date, start again. And I mean, unless you're doing something, wildly different, like becoming a fisherman, having worked in an office or something like that, there's so many skills that just being a good professional that you can bring with you. And even, I brought skills from a small company as a renewable developer into the big multinational world, open plan offices, hundreds of people. But vice versa, as I've come back, I have brought more skills that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't made that step into the larger financial world. So yeah, I think that I would try and just portray it as it's just another set of tools that you're bringing that makes you a more rounded member of staff and employee.
Yeah, it sounds, Ryan, that you would need a bit of resilience as well to actually try and make that effective transition.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as I said, it is a daunting prospect, especially, thinking about, all right, I need to tailor my CV to a new industry. I need to start thinking about interviews. And I would just say that, ask for help. There's recruiters out there that, as the client, they'll give you sessions for free, help you work on your CV. If you can, try to connect with people on LinkedIn. Some people will answer a question, if you send them a message. I've had people sort of, when I had moved, I had, random people approach me and ask me about jobs that were being advertised in my new industry. And ultimately they ended up getting roles. And I think that can be a way that can help. And I mean, it's I think no one really wants to find themselves in a situation where they have to change or they feel they have to change. I mean, it might be someone you might be quite an optimistic and, quite a gutsy kind of person that's like, I fancy something different. But for me, and I think for a lot of people, it's sort of I'm kind of running out of options. So maybe a change of scene is what I have to do. And there's always that thought of, well, do I need to go and completely retrain at, university and all that kind of stuff? But once you're down the road with being an adult, you don't really want to have to untake a lot of steps that you've made. So I think that, breaking down the barriers between the different industries, just because you did something different doesn't mean that you're not going to be effective. And I found that coming into an industry with a totally different perspective and a different experience, I could actually offer something immediately, something different that they didn't have. You might go into a team of people that have been on a natural progression into their roles, have never really experienced anything different. You could come in with, I don't know, a particular skill in IT or something. Immediately, you can offer something that's useful. And that'll, for someone like me who wants to feel useful and helpful straight away, I feel like it bought me some time to get up to speed with the other elements of the role, because I could make myself helpful with some aspect and give myself a little bit more confidence as I went forward.
And you talked when you made that transition from from a sort of green company to financial services back to a sort of green energy type company, that you developed some skills along the way. I mean, can you give us an example of a couple of new skills that you developed as part of that process? Yeah,
I mean, particularly, I guess, the first transition of going from, a team of 5 people where every day I'm speaking with the CEO, the owner, it's their money that's going in. You really gain a perspective of, risk profile. It's not just a color on a chart. It's real, it's tangible. And, the way that you get information across to the people that are making decisions is really important. So when I went to, a really large multinational company, I had a team of, 20 people around me, many people above me, just understanding the wider picture and the context of what we were being asked to do. And just giving that sense of realism to some of the numbers that, you know, in the financial world you get thrown about and things like that was helpful. And then coming back, obviously being part of a huge machine where, you know, management, information reporting, the way that you log your hours, all that kind of stuff, just the, I guess, the nuts and bolts of being a small cog in a really big wheel. That attention to detail and that sort of organizational focus, you come back into a team, you know, people that have not been under those sort of pressures, you know, the deadlines, you can offer a lot of perspective, and you can, you know, bring like templates of, yeah, this is how we did it here, this is how we did it there. And there's a lot of work that's gone into making, you know, big companies as efficient as possible, which you can quite easily just bring across, just an idea, a spreadsheet, you know, I love a spreadsheet, things like that.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds, Ryan, as well, that in terms of attitudes, very important, being willing to learn,
yeah,
you know, on a regular basis.
I think that, you know, some of the, it's not even really a transferable skill, it's just a quality that anyone can learn and possess. It's just, you know, being a good team member, asking the right questions at the right time, you know, paying attention to the answers. You know, from my experience, management, people that know more than you, the thing, they're happy to be asked questions, but they don't want to be asked the same question over and over again. So asking the right questions, being inquisitive, being helpful, you know, everyone wants to make a good impression. So once you're in a position to be able to help someone out, you know, offering your help, and yeah, just generally having a good attitude, and you know,
yeah,
portraying that you want to be there is always, even who you work for, who you work with can often be more important than what you're doing. Mm-hmm. I've found, in terms of, you can be working in an industry that you're really passionate about, that, you know, you're excited about what you're doing, but if you're not in the right environment, you won't feel great, and it'll ultimately, it's your own enjoyment, it's your life. So try and just, you know, be positive.
Grand. Well, on that note, hopefully we might have time at the end, Ryan, to come back and sure, discuss a bit further. Particularly, I'm interested in the transition that we have as individuals and as an economy, more into sort of a green economy, in which you are very much at the heart of. But if we pause that just for the moment and turn to yourself, Robbie, in terms of our third R, which is relationships. And indeed, I know that you have got experience of working with a number of different employers, but I wonder if you could specifically share with us your thoughts on the importance of relationships in a work context and how you go about developing and strengthening these.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, to give some background, as was said at the beginning of this presentation, I work within a sort of large global financial firm, and I think within every organization, small or large, probably the most fundamental thing that you will have is the relationships with your colleagues. With COVID having hit, I think that's probably more important now than ever. Being in an office 5 days a week, 9 till 5, everyone is easily accessible. You don't have to put time aside. If you want to have a quick chat with someone, you go over and say, "Hey, can you help me with this?" or whatnot. It's all quite fluid, and I think as we move towards a sort of more hybrid working environment, the overall sort of relationships you have with colleagues will become more important. Certainly from my experience, having worked from home over the past year, there's generally a sort of shift from that fluid attitude towards actually dedicating time with your team, with other colleagues, to ensure that you're building up these relationships. I mean, 50% of my team now I've never met in person. We have never had a face-to-face chat. So in order to build that relationship, and also to improve upon your productivity as a team, you need to have that time aside, whether it be daily or weekly, in order to sort of keep up to speed with one another, and learn from one another. I think Ryan sort of alluded to the fact that if you hate your job environment, and you don't really understand why you're doing what you're doing, and you don't get on with the people you work with, it's very difficult. It's a huge proportion of your life that you're going to spend working, and I think the biggest part of that is always going to be your relationships. I think for your own mental health and physical health and everything, that's important. But then from a standpoint of how the company is actually running, the productivity, the quality of work, the diversity of thinking, and I suppose to some degree your career path and how you move up the ladder, if you will, that I think is all built around relationships. And I think going forward, all corporations will start to build that into their ways of working, whereby you will have time dedicated in order to improve and build upon those relationships.
Yeah, no, I mean, what you say is really interesting. It will be fascinating to see how this evolves over the next sort of 12 to 18 months as we move, as you say, to this more kind of hybrid type of model, because it must be incredibly difficult for a lot of people, particularly, you know, coming new into an organization, if, as you say, Robbie, you've actually never met any of your colleagues, how to actually develop a relationship, you know, collaboration and so on. So it'd be good to get a bit more from you in terms of what your thoughts are around things like mentor programs, whether that's a good idea, or what other practical things you think employers can usefully do to try and improve the sort of working environment for people like yourself.
Yeah, so in regards to mentorship programs or sort of similar things, I think they're a great idea, and I think that you'll see going forward that ends up being sort of part of the responsibility, generally speaking, of more senior members of teams. Certainly within my own team, we've had a lot of new hires that are reskilling, similarly to what Ryan's talked about, coming from different backgrounds. So in order to sort of seamlessly adapt into not only the demands of the company, but how we work as a business, it's become more commonplace that the responsibility of a senior member of the team will sort of be a mentor, and then they will be teamed up with someone new that's come into the team. And obviously that may sound quite daunting, particularly if you come into a new business and you don't know who that mentor is going to be. But I think you'll start to find that there's a real focus on individual needs and individual desires. So rather than just being told, "Hi, here's your laptop. I'm going to pass you off to, you know, Gary or whatever. Good luck." It will be sitting down, getting to know your team, and then thereafter you'll start to build up those individual relationships yourself, and be asked, you know, who out of the senior team do you feel that you get on best with, you could learn best from, and then be able to be paired up with them. And in that way, it's a more collaborative system. Everyone is winning ultimately. The newer team members are learning from those that have the experience, have the knowledge, and those senior members are sort of beginning to pick up more management skills and whatnot. I think as a waterfall system, that is going to be very useful and probably seen more commonly across the board. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, quite a bit of food for thought there from all our panel. I'd like to maybe just pause at this juncture and ask Eric to share with us if there's any sort of immediate comments or feedback or questions that are coming through.
Few sort of key comments perhaps on each, and some questions on each as well. Do you want to do them one topic at a time, or
whatever makes sense, Eric? Just
okay. If we bounce back to when Kirsty was talking, I think comments around about the fact that really it was about consciously preparing, and she was, you know, sort of coming up with this very deliberate thing. Couple of questions. Somebody said that they use reading as a coping mechanism when they're kind of stressed, and really just wanting to know what were others' coping mechanisms. So Kirsty talked about meditation, yoga, exercise. What about the other two panelists, perhaps? What are their coping mechanisms?
I think for me, exercise similarly is one. Not even on a work level, on just a basic level. Sometimes I'll have a bad day if I don't get off to a good start in terms of just blowing out some cobwebs by getting some exercise in. I have a good relationship with food, shall we say? So that's always, putting in the time to make something good for yourself. Certainly quite therapeutic and relaxing.
And music.
Yeah.
Robbie?
Yeah, I to be honest, I'm probably going to sort of say quite similarly to Ryan, and sort of also Kirsty, in the sense of being quite deliberate. So certainly from my experience, I try to dedicate time every morning, wake up slightly earlier in order to get out, get some exercise, get some fresh air, and sort of prepare myself for the day, rather than, I think it's quite easy to allow stress to build up and then go, well, I've got all this work to do. I'll just put all these other things to the side and I'll just solely focus on the work. But I think having these resiliency practices in place are very important for sort of your overall productivity and longevity as well. So yeah, I think for me that would be one of them. And as Ryan has said, I do think diet, in terms of, in a stressful situation and whatnot, it's very, very easy to immediately turn to the sweet box or whatever it is that you have. And I think, being very conscious of that is important. I think that has a very big impact on your mental health and your physical health. So yeah, I'd reiterate quite heavily the 2 points that they've already both made.
Yeah, great. Just can I just jump back to Kirsty for a minute then? The second question was, you talked about meditation. Do you find that really important, really helpful?
I think everybody has their own mechanisms. For me, meditation is extremely helpful. I practice it every few nights, and particularly when I'm stressed, it's what really helps me get to sleep. But I think it depends how much you put into it is what you'll get out of it. And if you're somebody who doesn't find things like meditation or mindfulness helpful, then you find other coping mechanisms. But I can't stress enough that for me, these things are not natural. Resilience is not natural. And just as Robbie was saying, these are learned behaviors. You put the time in that you need as an individual to get out what you need from that. And some people need more than others, and I'm somebody that needs quite a lot. So I've tried a number of avenues, and meditation and mindfulness is something that does really work for me.
Thanks, that's good. You talked there about learning and learned behaviours, and that probably jumps me on to Ryan. When you were talking about reskilling, Ryan, the thing that kind of came across was maybe there's some concerns about, am I wasting time and energy? But more it was, I'm adding to the tool set. Yeah. And a couple of questions. You talked about barriers, breaking down barriers. Mm-hmm. Do you think the barriers are real, or do we build them ourselves? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. I think that certainly the first barrier is a barrier in your mind. If you are unable to consider other paths for yourself, if you feel like you're stuck in the stream, then yeah, that's the first barrier to get past. I do think that, I think nowadays, I think it's expected that our generation will have 12 or 13 jobs in our lifetime, which, I think, for Michael's generation, I think you were one or two, but I think not as many. And I think that especially with a pandemic, and you do really feel for those that have spent a lot of time perhaps training in an industry that is perhaps not going to survive too long. So I think that there's going to need to be some sort of focus or support for employers to look further afield, because I think one of the most disheartening things is when you're applying and you're just not getting anywhere in terms of interviews or anything like that. I always found that, you know, for both of my transitions, I probably spent 9 months trying to change job, and 6 months got absolutely nowhere, and then it all came quite quickly. So supporting people through that process is important, and I think everyone acknowledging that, you know, people go to university to learn life skills. They don't necessarily learn how to do one specific thing, and I think being conscious that you're just becoming a more rounded person and you're becoming more emotionally intelligent and academically intelligent is key. And yeah, don't put yourself in a box. Don't limit yourself.
Excellent, that's good. You've just actually answered question 3, which was around about this idea of multiple careers and career environment going forward. But somebody's just popped in another question here to ask, let me understand from your generation's point of view, and you talk about Michael's generation. Sadly, I'm even slightly older than Michael. What's more important now? Qualifications and paper certification or experiences? What do you think?
I think it's tough. I think the reality is you're being asked for both. You know, if you want to go into, you know, a professional role with a, you know, if you have certain aspirations about, you know, starting salary and career progression, is that probably something that I didn't put enough emphasis on was experience throughout university. When I was training, I was working to sustain myself, but probably not in the right areas, and you feel frustrated because you feel like you're behind the curve by the time you've realized that, you know, there's, you know, the including, you know, your colleagues in university, the ones that had parents in the industries understood what the progression was for them, would say, you know, 6th year at school, you need to get some shadowing experience in an engineering firm. You need to start thinking about this immediately. I didn't have my first technical sort of experience till I was, you know, in my penultimate year. And by that point, you already feel like you're fighting against the current. So my advice to anyone, if they have an idea of where they want to go, is it's never too early, unfortunately, to start thinking about work and getting yourself in with the right people, because it'll just save you a lot of headache and a lot of effort further down the line.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks for that. Can I just jump on to Robbie now? A couple of key comments that I really like this idea that being intentional in the relationships is important, given that, as you said, work's a huge proportion of your life. So the relationships need to be right. Couple of questions. I'll go to the second one first, which was the question was, how important these days do you think that business, whether it's a small or a large business, how important is it that they'll identify that relationships are a priority rather than the pounds they're going to save having people working from home?
I think it's hugely important. I think it's two different scenarios for small versus big. I think generally speaking, on a big, you know, global corporation, the pound value has historically been what's important rather than the relationships that you build. And I think certain people get drawn towards that, and then these smaller businesses, the person-to-person relationship is more valuable. I think certainly from my experience within the past 12 months, I've noticed a big shift towards putting a much greater emphasis on the importance of the relationships we have within work, sort of people high up in the company, stakeholders, making a concerted effort to stay in communication with the rest of the business, but also highlight the importance of everyone doing that and saying, we're putting time aside so that we can build these relationships, continue to nurture them. You should too. And if that means that you don't have as much time to do the actual work, that's not a problem, because in the long run, we're actually going to produce better quality work, be more productive. So I think some businesses and some organizations, probably similar to my own big finance corporations, Goldman Sachs, they've been in the news recently, not focusing on anything to do with relationships, just totally attacking your resilience. But I do think over time that will be the case, partially because with a more hybrid workforce, people have more options in terms of where they work. And there will be a realization that you will be unable to sustain a business and attract the best people if you're not putting an emphasis on relationships within that environment.
Yeah, great. There's a couple of more questions which are linked, and I think probably starting to wind up with this. But I'm going to ask you, but then I'd like Ryan and Kirsty as well, just to comment if they're able. The first question was, any tips for those just coming into the workplace in this COVID era, where they maybe start their career remote working, working from home? Any practical tips about getting relationships right when they do move back to a kind of office environment? And do you all, final question, do you all think that communication, building relationships is vital, and that productivity can actually be improved by good relationships? So what about the tips first, Robbie, and then the others?
Yeah, of course. I think it's a great question. That is a very difficult one. I say thankfully, I haven't had the experience myself of joining a corporation remotely, but quite a few of my colleagues have. And I think in terms of getting it right, it can be very difficult and daunting at the best of times, joining a new company, even if you're doing it face to face, even more so when you don't have that ability. But I think it's about being proactive, I think, and putting time aside to actually get to know everyone within your team. That's what's been happening on our end. Anyone that's joined has made sure that rather than just getting immediately stuck into the work, they've used the sort of first 4 to 6 weeks to actually dedicate 30 minutes a day or whatever it is to building up a relationship with each member of the team. Because going forward, when you then need to do the work, you know who to talk to, who's the expert in various areas, and people are just more likely and willing to help you out if you've made the effort. So I think, it's a simple tip, but any job you're going to go into, prioritize your relationships. It's going to be beneficial for you, but also the team around you, and the work will follow ultimately. Yeah.
Okay, Kirsty, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think within our company we have a buddy scheme, essentially, where new colleagues, when they first arrive at the firm, they get appointed a buddy, and that buddy is meant to check in on them on a weekly basis and be there to answer any questions. It's very effective if you put the time in to do that. Unfortunately, we're all busy people, and you can always find that after a few weeks, people start to forget that they actually have a buddy. So my advice to people coming into a job is, don't rely on other people to contact you. If you have questions or you feel you need a bit of support, you reach out and contact them, because it tends to be that people want to help. They are just so busy doing their day-to-day work that they forget that there's other people out there who might need a bit more support than they do. So I think the best advice is to reach out to people and not rely on them to reach out to you.
That's great advice. Ryan, final word before back to Michael.
Yeah, I would say that with the volume of Zoom and Teams calls, especially, hopefully as we sort of end the permanent working from home and there's the opportunity to get back into the office, that a lot of people just don't turn on their cameras. They'll use it just like a phone. They won't present themselves. And I understand that if you're on a call with 8 people and everyone's got their camera off, it can be a bit daunting, especially if you were a new start, to turn your camera on. But if you felt confident and able to turn it on, people start putting a a face to the name, start to feel like they know you a little bit better. And then, you know, hopefully when people start going to the offices, there'll be the opportunity to socialize, you know, extracurricular outside of the working hours. And you might not be the most sociable person in the world, but it really would be worthwhile if you can, if you feel able to sort of attending a few sort of after work drinks and stuff like that, because that's where the bond can be formed, especially, you know, if you don't work with people closely, because you might work with someone really closely and it comes naturally, you develop a rapport through discussing work. But if you're quite isolated in your role and what you do, there's no real substitute for actually just going and forcing yourself to speak to people about not stuff that's not work, and it will filter through and you'll start to work better together, you'll trust each other, and yeah, generally there'll probably be less conflict and things like that in the workplace.
Great, thanks. Michael.
That's just been terrific. Thanks, Eric, and thanks so much to our panel. Such tremendous wisdom and insight from young people, which is so inspiring. I think certainly from someone from my generation, I just find that absolutely terrific, and gives us great confidence about that. You know, our future is in very good and very kind of safe hands. I think, you know, very wise words around the intentional relationships, you know, from Robbie, some practical tips from Kirsty in terms of how to maintain resilience, and to, again, a lot of that's about being intentional too. And Ryan, your experience in terms of transitioning and the need to be able to adapt to different circumstances and situations as we kind of look forward to a very different world to the one in which you know, I and others inhabited. It wasn't that long ago that I was in the workplace, but thank you again. You know, it's been absolutely terrific. It's given us a lot of food for thought, and as I say, you know, very much grateful to you all three for your time, your contributions this evening. Next month, we'll be back, and this time we'll be in conversation with Susan McInnes, some of you may know, former Chief Executive of Standard Life. Do keep an eye on the Business Matters website and social media for details. But in the meantime, if you would like to follow up on anything that we've discussed today or indeed in previous interviews, then please feel free to contact us at Business Matters. We'd absolutely love to hear from you. So finally, it just leaves me once again to say a huge thank you to Kirsty, Ryan and Robbie for their time and thoughtful insights. And thanks to everyone who has joined us live for this event or who watch a recording in the days and weeks ahead. In the meantime, and until the next time, it's goodbye from me. Thank you very much.